The Montrose estate looked like the kind of place nothing bad could ever happen to the people who owned it. The lawn was the right kind of green, uniform but not fake, like someone had tuned it with a dial. The hedges were squared to the inch. The stone driveway curved just enough to make arriving feel like an event. Everywhere Daria looked that first day, there were signs of taste and money. And cameras. Always cameras. One tucked under the eaves, another in the doorbell, a dark glass bubble above the garage, a narrow eye watching the gate. The house did not just sit there, it stared back. Over time, Clearview Cleaning's white van became another part of the scenery. Every Tuesday, the gate recognized the license plate, the motor hummed, and the security system recorded 3 figures walking up the path with vacuums and caddies instead of invitations. Daria led the crew. Nearly 40, shoulders built by years of other people's stares, feet that knew the language of cheap work shoes. A patterned scarf covered her hair, partly for practicality, partly because rich clients seemed calmer when their cleaners looked put together. Her navy Clearview t-shirt was always tucked in, logo sharp. Rico brought the bulk. Early 30s, tall, thick wrists, a back that could lift rolled rugs alone. On paper, he was our Juarez employee. In motion, he was a human dolly, a moving wall with a gentle laugh that rarely came out during weekday jobs. During weekday jobs, he stayed quiet. Loose was the new one, though new already meant 3 years. 22, quick hands, eyes that noticed everything, sometimes too fast. She was still young enough to flinch a little when expensive things sat loose on countertops. She still triple-checked her pockets before leaving any house. They had a routine. The house manager, Ms. Kendall, opened the door with a tablet in her hand and a smile that never quite reached her pupils. She lived in the zone between servant and supervisor, far above the cleaning crew, far below the people whose portraits hung in oil along the hallway. She listed tasks in a voice that sounded like an automated message. Family out, children at school, formal living room, kitchen, breakfast area, gym, offices. No need to enter the wine cellar. The dining room sideboard was set for an event, so nothing on that surface should be moved. Departure at 3 o'clock sharp. The words trust and appreciate floated by like polite wrapping on a box full of rules. Then, the 3 of them slipped into their practiced orbit. Luce floated to the upper floor, where the expensive chaos lived. The teenage daughter's room was a storm of clothes and cosmetics over furniture that looked like a magazine spread. The son's room smelled like effort and energy drinks, sports equipment spilling out of the closet, bathrooms, mirrors, products with labels in French. Luz moved through it all with careful hands, touching only what cleaning required, straightening without snooping. Rico took the ground floor. Kitchen first, always. The marble island, the professional stove, the crumb trail of children whose job was not to think about crumbs. He emptied trash, scrubbed fridge shelves, wiped fingerprints from stainless steel until every reflection slipped into place. From the kitchen to the living room, from the living room to the offices. Past a wall safe he never glanced at for more than a second. Past a glass case of watches that could probably pay 3 years of his rent. Daria lived in the spaces that connected everything. Stairs, hallways, guest suite, powder rooms, the small office no one used that had become a landing pad for unopened mail. She checked corners, looked for the dusty inches that were easy to miss. Clearview had built its survival on details invisible to the people who wrote the checks. They rarely spoke above a murmur, a quick reminder about a forgotten drawer, a quiet joke about a painting of a bowl of fruit that followed you with its eyes. Most of the time, there was only the sound of vacuums, running water, and the faint noise of whatever show the Montroses had paused last on their giant TV. The cameras in the ceilings watched all of it. Hours later, when floors gleamed and towels were folded and the air smelled like lemon and glass cleaner, Daria did her final lap. Living room, cushions reset, throw blanket folded, expensive coffee table books aligned. Kitchen, counters clean, sink empty, light catching on brushed metal. Upstairs, beds made with hotel corners, bathroom fixtures shining. On the way out that particular Tuesday, she passed the small tray near the front door, where keys, mail, and a few personal items lived. Something tugged at her memory. A leather wallet that had been closed when they arrived now sat slightly open, a platinum card just visible at the edge. Her eyes registered the detail and slid away. The habit was automatic. Seeing was allowed. Touching was not. They left at 3:02 p.m. Security cameras watched them walk down the path, the van pull away, the gate close. Somewhere inside the walls, someone later pressed rewind. The call came 2 days later, just as Daria finished sending out invoices. The laptop was old and the spreadsheet simple, but the numbers on it represented groceries, rent, Luz's bus pass, Rico's car note. Clearview was not a corporation. It was Daria and the two people who trusted her enough to let her name stand between them and the clients. Her phone lit up with the name Montrose Estate. For a second, she thought they might be calling to add an extra day. Maybe there had been a spill, a party, some emergency. Instead, a clipped upper-class voice said they would no longer require Clearview's services. The words sounded almost kind. The content was a guillotine. Daria forced her throat to work. She asked the obvious question as calmly as she could. Had they done something wrong? A measured pause on the other end of the line suggested the speaker was deciding how much to say. Then phrases arrived in the tone people reserve for awkward topics they believe they are handling generously. There had been a security concern. Some personal items were missing, a pair of cufflinks, a bracelet. The family's internal monitoring had flagged suspicious behavior by some members of the cleaning crew. The matter was being handled with their security firm and legal counsel. For now, the relationship was terminated. The call ended with a faint click that sounded polite, not punitive. The aftertaste felt like accusation. Daria's first thought was not legal. It was personal. She pictured Luz's face if she heard the word missing next to her work. She pictured Rico being watched in a store as if his body were a crime. She imagined how quickly stories could travel in the circles where people like the Montroses knew other people like the Montroses. Her second thought was brutal math. The estate was their highest-paying weekly client. Losing them would hurt. Losing them under a cloud of implied theft could kill the business. Within 3 hours, emails from 2 other clients landed in Daria's inbox. Both canceled upcoming appointments with vague references to changes in schedule and restructuring. Neither mentioned the mansion by name. They didn't have to. Rumor had already begun to work. Fear sat like a weight between Daria's shoulder blades as she called her crew. Rico arrived first at her apartment, shaking off the outside chill, jaw clenched. Luce came not long after, hands stuffed deep in her jacket pockets, chewing the inside of her cheek. Neither of them needed the full explanation. The word security was enough. People like them knew exactly what it meant when a rich household and its lawyer looked at your presence and a missing object in the same sentence. Daria put everything on the table: the call, the words, suspicious behavior on camera, the implication that police might be next. She watched their faces as she spoke. Rico went from confusion to outrage in seconds. Luz's eyes widened, then hardened. There was no stumbling, no guilty shuffle, only sharp, insulted disbelief. All three of them knew they had not taken anything. All three of them also knew that, historically, innocence had never been enough to keep certain people out of trouble. They could do nothing and hope it faded. Or they could treat this like what it was: an accusation with teeth. Daria chose the second option. Years of being careful around other people's property had taught her more than how to clean. It had taught her that if you wanted anyone to take you seriously, you needed a story as organized as your mop closet. She began with paper. Clearview's time logs showed arrival and departure down to the minute. Copies of texts with Ms. Kendall confirmed the schedule. Payment histories proved there had never been disputes about extra hours or billing. None of that answered the theft claim, but it painted a picture of professionalism. The next step required more nerve. She needed to know what, exactly, the Montroses thought they had. The estate had a small security company logo on one of its gates. Daria recognized it from other high-end properties. She also remembered something the rep had once bragged about during a different client's installation: everything recorded and backed up in the cloud. That angle was probably closed. The footage belonged to the property owner. But cameras did not only stare inward. On a hunch, Daria went back to the quiet street outside the estate and sat in her car at dusk. She watched the front gate, the angle of the house, the line of sight from the road. She spotted a traffic camera at the corner, and a neighbor's doorbell camera pointed almost directly at the Montrose driveway. The house that watched everything was, in turn, half-watched by the world. If anyone external had captured something, it would not show what happened inside. It would, however, show who went in and out, and when. For a moment, that felt like a dead end. New footage of them arriving and leaving with nothing but their caddies would not change the fact that valuables had gone missing. Then Luce said something that shifted the frame. She reminded them that Clearview was not the only service entering that property. Landscapers, pool technicians, caterers, a personal trainer, a nanny, a dog walker, a piano teacher, packages dropped by strangers whose names the Montroses did not know. People with more social trust than cleaners, but no less access. The problem was not just that they were accused, it was that they were singled out. If there truly was suspicious behavior, someone had made a choice about which suspicious face counted. The hidden cameras that mattered most to the story did not belong to the Montroses at all. They belonged to a neighbor 3 houses down who went to bed early and watched the world through a smartphone in his darkened living room. His video doorbell faced sideways, catching a slice of the estate's driveway in each frame, the front of the mansion, the gate, and a helpful view of whoever parked just on the street outside the iron bars. Daria did not know this when she knocked on his door. She only knew that the neighbor's car was older, the yard less manicured, and the porch light a cheap bulb instead of some recessed designer fixture. It was not a perfect signal, but it suggested that the person on the other side of that door might understand what it meant to be watched, rather than doing the watching. She did not arrive empty-handed. Her cousin's friend, a junior attorney at a small legal nonprofit, had advised her on what to say. There had been an accusation. They believed it was false. They were asking politely if anyone had footage of comings and goings from that week that might help. The neighbor turned out to be an older man with tired eyes and a sweatshirt from a decades-old sports team. His reaction to hearing the word security footage and cleaning crew was not shock. It was weary recognition. He let them in. He brought up his camera app. Together, over the hum of a small fridge, they scrolled through a timeline of dates and times. On the Tuesday in question, the video showed the Clearview van arriving at its usual time. Then, the landscaper's truck. Then, a courier dropping a parcel. Later, the van leaving. Nothing surprising, nothing useful. But the neighbor, thumb still on the timeline, kept scrolling into the hours after Clearview had gone. That was when the camera started talking. At 4:17 p.m., a sleek car that did not belong to the Montrose family eased to a stop outside the gate. The driver buzzed in, someone opened, and the car slid up the driveway out of frame. 20 minutes later, the same car rolled back out, paused, and then sat idling half on the sidewalk directly in front of the neighbor's camera. The angle was not perfect. It did not show faces through the windshield. But when the doors opened, it recorded two figures getting out. A young woman with the same posture and hair as the Montrose's teenage daughter, and a young man in designer clothes, laughing too hard at something only they found funny. The girl walked to the curb, rummaged briefly at her bag, and held something small and metal up to show him. It glinted once in the shade. He leaned closer. Then he wrapped an arm around her, and they both looked back at the mansion with the shared thrill of someone who had gotten away with something. A moment later, the girl hesitated and tucked whatever it was deeper into her bag. The boy said something, shrugged, and gestured toward the road. They climbed back into the car and drove away. Nothing about the clip screamed bracelet or cufflinks. Yet anyone familiar with the estate and its security schedule could see an important fact. This visit happened after the cleaning crew had left and before Mrs. Montrose claimed to have discovered anything missing. The house had its own cameras, of course. Those were inside, above jewelry boxes and along hallways, capturing clearer images from better angles. If the Montroses were so certain the cleaners were at fault, it meant someone had looked at footage and interpreted it through a particular lens. This little doorbell recording showed that the lens itself might be cracked. The neighbor, watching his small phone screen with them, pursed his lips. He agreed to send them the video. He also, quietly, admitted that he had seen the Montrose girl sneak visitors in before, always when cars with logos like Clearview's had gone. Daria left that apartment with more than a clip. She left with narrative ammunition. The cameras around the mansion had finally started to talk. They just hadn't said what the Montroses expected. The junior attorney took one look at the footage and changed his tone from mildly helpful to very interested. He and a more senior colleague invited Daria, Rico, and Luz into a small office that smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. They listened to the whole story. The years of service, the sudden accusation, the claim of suspicious behavior, the cancellations from other clients. They watched the neighbor's video twice, then 3 times. For lawyers who dealt with discrimination cases, the pattern was depressingly familiar. When valuable objects vanished in spaces where wealthy people and working-class people mixed, suspicion rarely flowed uphill. They began to build a response. Official letters went out first. One to the Montrose family, one to their security firm, one to the police department rumored to be reviewing footage. The tone was formal and calm. The content was sharp. Clearview Cleaning denied the accusations. They requested copies of any footage in which their workers appeared. They noted the existence of third-party video showing another visitor within the relevant time window. They suggested, in careful legal language, that continuing to spread claims of theft without considering all evidence could constitute defamation. For a few days, there was silence. Then, inevitably, pride pushed back. The Montrose's lawyer responded with a controlled flick of words. Their position had not changed. Items were missing. Their security team had flagged behavior that, in their view, justified terminating a vendor relationship. They were under no obligation to share internal footage. They had not publicly named the cleaning company. Therefore, reputational harm was speculative. The letters danced around the raw core. People with money believed people without money had stolen from them. People without money insisted they had not. The cameras, impartial as glass, held a version of the truth in their unblinking memory. What tipped the balance was not a sudden burst of conscience, but publicity. The legal nonprofit worked with a journalist who covered labor and class stories. With permission from Daria and her crew, and with identifying details of the Montroses stripped out at first, the journalist wrote about the cleaning company accused by a client's cameras, and the other cameras that told a different story. The article described the mansion, the termination, the neighbor's doorbell footage of the teenage daughter and her boyfriend. It named the broader pattern: domestic workers, nannies, janitors, cleaners, almost always the first suspects when something expensive went missing, even when there were other guests, other employees, even other family members with access. The piece did not show faces. It did not show addresses. It did, however, mention that the legal team believed they could subpoena security footage if the matter escalated. Suddenly, the Montroses were not just powerful homeowners dealing quietly with a problem. They were a type. Wealthy employers under a microscope in a story about bias and blame. In those circles, reputation and self-image mattered almost as much as money. Behind the scenes, the lawyer for the estate called the nonprofit. The tone was noticeably less dismissive. There was talk of misunderstandings and overzealous interpretations by a contracted security analyst. There was an offer to resolve the matter amicably. The resolution came in layers. Internally, the Montroses commissioned a second review of their own footage, not through the original security firm, but through a different technician recommended by their insurer. That person, aware of the outside scrutiny, watched with a less biased eye. The sequence that emerged was difficult to ignore. The cleaning crew, moving through rooms, handling only what their task required, leaving on schedule. Later, the teenage daughter entering the master bedroom, opening a drawer, slipping something into her bag. Later still, the same drawer opened by Mrs. Montrose, a pause, and then a flurry of activity toward the security console. The cameras had been talking all along. Someone had simply decided which parts of their speech mattered. Faced with this, the estate's lawyer quietly advised against involving the police further. They suggested reaching some form of settlement with Clearview Cleaning and letting the matter die. For Daria, Rico, and Luz, money would help. But the thing crushing their lungs when they woke up at night was not only financial fear. It was the knowledge that in the split second between missing and who did it, their faces had been the ones placed at the center of suspicion. So the terms they pushed for with their attorneys were not just a check. They wanted a letter. Not the kind that said, "We regret any confusion," or "mistakes were made." A letter that said, plainly, that after reviewing all evidence, the estate no longer believed Clearview Cleaning or its staff had stolen anything. A letter they could show to clients who might have heard whispers. A letter they could keep for their own sanity, proof printed in ink that the house that watched them had also saved them. Reluctantly, and with language softened as much as their lawyer could manage, the Montroses agreed. They framed the shift as an update. Subsequent review had led them to conclude that the items in question were no longer considered stolen by the cleaning crew. They appreciated the years of service and had no intention of pursuing the matter further. They did not mention their daughter. They did not apologize directly. The law non-profit recommended taking the letter and the confidential settlement payment and moving on. There was more they could technically do: push for an apology, file a formal complaint, but every step risked dragging the crew through a public fight they did not necessarily want. Daria agreed, with one caveat of her own. She asked the journalist for a follow-up. The second story was shorter. It described how additional footage had shifted the mansion's certainty. It mentioned that the cleaning crew had been cleared. It never named the family. It did, however, spell out a lesson. In a world saturated with cameras, evidence often exists for more than one narrative. But only some people are taught to trust it. Trust returned slowly. Clients who had canceled without explanation did not all come back. Some never responded to Daria's careful emails at all, but a few did, sheepish, stumbling over words like, "Seems there was a misunderstanding," and "I heard you were cleared." Others found Clearview through the article, drawn by the fact that the crew had gone to the trouble of defending themselves instead of disappearing under the weight of accusation. A local community center hired them for weekly cleaning. A small chain of clinics signed a contract. None paid as well as the mansion had, but they paid reliably and with less contempt humming under the surface. The crew changed too. On the surface, they moved through houses much as before: vacuum, wipe, straighten, leave. But there was a subtle shift in where their eyes rested. Cameras that had once felt like threats now looked faintly like potential witnesses. They still worked carefully. They still avoided touching what did not need touching. Yet some of the bone-deep fear loosened. Somewhere in a cloud server, in a neighbor's doorbell, in a grainy feed above a gate, there might be proof that their hands were exactly where they said they had been. Daria printed the Montrose letter on heavy paper and slid it into a plastic sleeve at the back of her Clearview binder. Whenever she felt that old tightness across her chest, she took it out. Not to forgive the people who had gone from "we appreciate your work" to "our cameras saw something in a heartbeat," but to remind herself that their version of events was not the only one the world could hold. Rico, who had always tried to make himself smaller in stores and lobbies, began to stand a little straighter. Luz, who used to flinch every time an alarm beeped, relaxed her shoulders half a centimeter when walking past security sensors. The hidden cameras had, in the end, spoken. They had revealed not only what happened in a jewelry drawer on a random Tuesday, but who the Montroses instinctively believed when something went wrong, and who they did not. They had highlighted the reflex that pointed down the service staircase instead of down the hall toward their own blood. The mansion kept its iron gate and trimmed hedges. The wealth inside its walls remained intact. The cleaning crew still drove past it, sometimes on the way to other jobs, the estate sitting there like a glossy page from a magazine. But the story Daria carried in her head when she glanced at those stone columns was no longer one of quiet, untouchable power. It was of a house full of cameras that had tried to condemn her and her people, and, once forced, had testified on their behalf instead. She kept working. Rico kept lifting. Luce kept noticing. And somewhere, endless lenses kept recording, waiting for the next time the world decided who looked like a thief and who looked like a victim, long before anyone hit play.